The courtroom was heavy with an oppressive silence, the kind that settles deep into the bones and makes even the slightest movement feel intrusive. Owen Jacobs, a man once revered as one of the finest officers in the city, sat at the defendant's table in handcuffs. His broad shoulders slumped, the weight of the world pressing down on him. Owen's face was unreadable, but his dark eyes flickered with pain, a stark contrast to the confident and composed man who once commanded respect in every room he entered. "Guilty." The judge's voice rang out, her gavel striking the wooden bench with a finality that reverberated through the courtroom. It was as if the sound itself shattered Owen's world into a million pieces. His heart plummeted, and his breath caught in his chest. A decorated officer with 15 years of impeccable service, Owen had dedicated his life to justice. Now, justice had seemingly betrayed him. From the back of the room, a pair of amber eyes watched intently, sharp, unwavering, and filled with an unshakable loyalty. Rex, Owen's German Shepherd K9 partner, sat perfectly still, his ears perked and his head tilted as if he could sense the turmoil in his handler's heart. To Rex, Owen wasn't just a partner. He was family. The thought of being separated from Rex pierced Owen deeper than the guilty verdict ever could. Owen kept his gaze fixed on the polished wooden table in front of him, trying to process the whirlwind of the last few months. He had been accused of tampering with evidence in a high-profile case, a crime he knew he hadn't committed. The evidence against him was damning, too damning, in fact. It didn't add up, and Owen knew in his gut that someone had set him up. But who? And why? As murmurs rippled through the crowd, the judge rose to leave. The courtroom stirred with restless energy, but Owen's voice broke through the noise. "Your Honor," he said, his voice strained but resolute, "please, before I'm taken away, I have one last request." The judge paused mid-step, turning to face him. "Go on," she said, her tone firm but tinged with curiosity. Owen inhaled deeply, the words trembling on his lips. "Let me say goodbye to Rex," he pleaded. "He's not just my partner. He's been my lifeline through everything. I won't see him again. Please." A ripple of surprise passed through the courtroom. It was an unusual request, but the sincerity in Owen's voice hung heavy in the air. The judge studied him for a long moment, her stern expression softening ever so slightly. 3 minutes, she said finally, her tone clipped but sympathetic. "Make them count." The officer standing guard hesitated, but the judge's nod signaled him to release Rex. The German Shepherd bolted across the room, his claws clicking loudly against the marble floor. Rex's tail wagged furiously as he reached Owen, and in one fluid motion, Owen dropped to his knees, pulling the dog into a tight embrace. "I'm so sorry, buddy," Owen whispered, his voice breaking as tears streamed down his face. He buried his face in Rex's thick fur, the familiar scent of his partner grounding him in this moment of despair. "I let you down. I don't know how, but I'll fix this. I promise." Rex let out a soft whimper, pressing his nose against Owen's chest. The bond between them was palpable, a connection forged through years of trust and shared danger. But just as Owen began to steel himself for the inevitable goodbye, Rex's demeanor changed. The dog stiffened in Owen's arms, his ears twitching and his nose working furiously. Rex began sniffing at Owen's jacket, his movements sharp and purposeful. Then, suddenly, Rex let out a series of sharp, insistent barks. The room fell silent, every eye turned toward them as Rex tugged at the fabric of Owen's jacket with his teeth. Confusion flickered across Owen's face, but he didn't resist. "What is it, boy?" he murmured, his heart pounding. Rex barked again, more forcefully this time, and began pawing at Owen's chest. An officer approached cautiously, his hand resting on the holster at his hip. "What's the dog doing?" the officer asked, his voice wary. Owen raised his hands slowly, his mind racing. "I don't know," he admitted, his gaze shifting between Rex and the officer. "He's never acted like this before." The officer reached out and patted down Owen's jacket. At first he found nothing unusual, but then his fingers brushed against something small and hard concealed in an inner pocket. Frowning, he pulled it out. A gasp rippled through the courtroom as the object caught the light, a small metallic recording device. "What is that?" the judge demanded, her tone sharp and commanding. The officer held it up, his face pale. "It's a recorder." The prosecutor's face drained of color. He stepped forward quickly, his voice rising in protest. "Your Honor, this is irrelevant. That device is not part of the evidence." "Let's find out," the judge countered, her tone icy. She motioned for the officer to activate the device. The room held its collective breath as the officer fumbled with the recorder. A static-filled crackle filled the air, followed by muffled voices. The tension in the room was unbearable as the voices became clear. "Just plant the evidence," a gravelly voice said. "No one's going to question it. Jacob's clean record makes him the perfect scapegoat. Get it done." Gasps erupted from the crowd. Owen's heart stopped. He recognized the voice immediately. It was Captain Ryan Hale, the man he had trusted with his life for years. The betrayal hit him like a punch to the gut. "This doesn't prove anything," the prosecutor blurted, his face flushed with panic. "It could be fabricated." "Enough!" the judge barked, slamming her gavel. She turned to the officer holding the recorder. "Secure that device as evidence. This trial is not over. I'm reopening this case." Owen stared at the recorder, his hands trembling. For the first time in weeks, hope flickered in his chest. The truth was finally within reach. As the officers led him back to his holding cell, Owen glanced back at Rex. The loyal dog sat poised, his intelligent eyes locked on Owen. A silent promise passed between them. This wasn't the end. Together, they would fight to uncover the truth. The recording had sent shockwaves through the courtroom, leaving everyone reeling. The judge's decisive gavel strike signaled the end of the sentencing hearing and the beginning of something much bigger, a full-blown investigation. As Owen Jacobs was escorted back to his holding cell, the flicker of hope that had ignited in his heart began to grow. For weeks, he had been drowning in despair, but now, Rex's instincts had thrown him a lifeline. The echoes of the recording played over and over in Owen's mind. Just plant the evidence. Jacob's clean record makes him the perfect scapegoat. The gravelly voice was unmistakable. It belonged to Captain Ryan Hale, his trusted mentor and someone Owen had considered a friend. The betrayal cut deeper than anything Owen had ever experienced. Back in his holding cell, Owen sank onto the cold metal bench, his hands trembling as he cradled his head. His thoughts churned with disbelief and anger. Captain Hale, the man who had guided him through the toughest years of his career, had orchestrated this nightmare. How long had Hale been playing this game? How many others had fallen victim to his schemes? And why had he targeted Owen? Owen clenched his fists, his jaw tightening. "I'll find out," he muttered under his breath. "I'll find out, and I'll make sure the truth comes out." Meanwhile, in her chambers, Judge Abigail Foster sat alone, listening to the recording for the third time. Her usually calm and composed demeanor was replaced with a deep frown as she tapped her pen against the desk. The words in the recording were damning, leaving little room for doubt about Captain Hale's involvement. But the judge knew that this was just the tip of the iceberg. If someone as high-ranking as Hale was willing to frame a decorated officer like Owen, there had to be more to the story. Judge Foster pressed the intercom button on her desk. "Summon Captain Hale to my office immediately," she instructed, her voice steady but cold. Hale, unaware of the storm brewing, had been lingering outside the courtroom, confident that his plan had gone off without a hitch. When a court officer approached him with the judge's summons, Hale's smug demeanor faltered. Adjusting his tie, he followed the officer down the hall, his mind racing. He knew the judge was a no-nonsense woman, but surely she hadn't seen through his web of lies already. Had she? The atmosphere in Judge Foster's office was suffocating as Captain Hale entered, his usual confidence replaced with a forced politeness. He offered a curt nod. "You wanted to see me, Your Honor?" The judge leaned forward, her fingers steepled under her chin. Without a word, she tapped the small recorder on her desk, its metallic surface glinting under the overhead light. Then she pressed play. "Just plant the evidence. Jacob's clean record makes him the perfect scapegoat." Hale's face blanched. His carefully constructed mask of indifference cracked for a fleeting moment before he recovered. I'm not sure what you're implying, Your Honor," he said, his voice steady but with a slight edge of defensiveness. "That recording could be fabricated. It's not admissible evidence." "I didn't ask for your opinion," the judge interrupted, her tone razor-sharp. "I act on evidence, Captain, and this recording is evidence of a crime. Several crimes, in fact." Hale opened his mouth to protest, but the judge held up a hand. "Enough. You're being detained for questioning while we investigate further. Officers," she gestured toward the 2 court officers standing at the door, "escort Captain Hale to holding." Hale's composure crumbled as the officers stepped forward. "You can't be serious," he blustered. "You're making a mistake." "No, Captain," the judge said icily. "The mistake was underestimating the integrity of this court." As Hale was led away, panic flashed in his eyes. He knew the walls were closing in, but how much of the truth had they uncovered? And how much longer could he keep his secrets buried? Back in his cell, Owen's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps echoing down the hall. He looked up to see Officer Ellie Harper standing outside the bars, her expression a mix of determination and sympathy. Ellie had been one of Owen's closest colleagues before his arrest. Unlike many others who had distanced themselves from him, she had never wavered in her belief in his innocence. "Ellie," Owen said, his voice rough, "what are you doing here?" She glanced over her shoulder to make sure they weren't being overheard before leaning in closer. "I heard about the recording," she said softly. "It's all over the station. They're finally looking into Hale." Owen exhaled sharply, relief washing over him. "It's about time." "But there's more," Ellie continued. "Rex found that recorder, right? That means he's already uncovered something Hale didn't want anyone to find. I think there's more out there, Owen. Something bigger." Owen nodded. "Then we need to find it. Hale didn't do this alone." "I'll do whatever it takes to clear your name," Ellie promised. "And Rex is with me now. If anyone can sniff out the truth, it's him." Owen smiled faintly at the mention of Rex. "Take care of him, Ellie. He's the best partner I've ever had." Ellie's eyes softened. "I will. But don't lose hope, Owen. We're going to get you out of this. And when we do, you and Rex will be back where you belong." The morning light streamed through the precinct's narrow windows as Officer Ellie Harper entered the K-9 unit. Rex, Owen's loyal partner, was pacing back and forth in his kennel, his sharp eyes trained on the door as if he were waiting for someone to let him out. Ellie crouched down in front of him, her expression soft but determined. "Hey, buddy," she said quietly, unlocking the gate. "Let's get to work. We've got a lot to figure out, don't we?" Rex wagged his tail slightly, his body language alert. He seemed to understand that something important was happening, and he was ready to do his part. The precinct was buzzing with rumors. The discovery of the recording had sent shockwaves through the department, and whispers of Captain Hale's detention were spreading like wildfire. Ellie, however, kept her focus razor sharp. With Rex by her side, she began her mission to uncover the truth. Her first stop was Owen's locker. If Hale had gone to such lengths to frame Owen, there had to be more evidence hidden somewhere. Rex trotted alongside her, his nose twitching as they approached the row of metal lockers. The K-9 stopped abruptly in front of Owen's locker and began sniffing intently. He pawed at the bottom corner, letting out a low whine. "What is it, boy?" Ellie asked, crouching down. She unlocked the door and began sorting through Owen's belongings. At first, she found nothing unusual: folded uniforms, a badge case, and a few personal items. But then Rex started pawing again, his focus unrelenting. Ellie reached further back and felt something taped to the inside wall of the locker. Carefully peeling it off, she revealed a thin manila envelope, slightly crumpled and sealed with tape. Her heart pounded as she opened it. Inside were several documents and photographs. The photographs were grainy but clear enough to identify the people in them. One showed Captain Hale meeting with a man Ellie immediately recognized as a known drug trafficker. Another showed Hale exchanging what appeared to be an envelope full of cash. The documents that accompanied the photos were even more damning: transaction records and falsified reports tied to the very case that had been used to frame Owen. Ellie's stomach churned. This wasn't just about Hale setting up Owen. This was part of something much bigger. The records indicated payments linked to multiple officers and even referenced a name, or rather, initials, AM. She pulled out her phone and snapped pictures of everything, her mind racing. "Good work, Rex," she said, scratching behind his ears. "This is exactly what we needed." Ellie brought the evidence to Judge Abigail Foster's chambers. The judge had already ordered a task force to investigate the recording, but these new discoveries deepened the scandal. Judge Foster examined the documents carefully, her expression growing darker with each passing moment. "This is worse than I expected," the judge admitted, leaning back in her chair. Captain Hale isn't just corrupt, he's part of a network. And these initials, AM, whoever that is, they're the one pulling the strings. We need to dig deeper, Ellie said firmly. If Hale is involved, there are probably others in the department who are compromised. The judge nodded. I'll expand the investigation, but this is dangerous territory, Officer Harper. Be careful who you trust. The task force worked late into the night, combing through the newly uncovered evidence. Names, payments, and falsified reports all pointed to a widespread web of corruption. Ellie couldn't shake the feeling that they were only scratching the surface. Whoever AM was, they held significant power, enough to manipulate the department from the shadows. Meanwhile, Rex had become a key player in the investigation. His instincts were sharper than ever, leading Ellie and the team to clues they might have otherwise missed. One of the task force members, Detective Luis Ramirez, marveled at the dog's precision. Rex is a genius, he said, watching as the canine sniffed out another hidden file from a stack of old case reports. It's like he knows exactly what we're looking for. Ellie smiled faintly, her thoughts drifting to Owen. He's not just a genius, she said. He's loyal. He'd do anything for Owen, and for the truth. The deeper they dug, the more dangerous the investigation became. One evening, Ellie returned to her desk to find an anonymous note slipped under her computer keyboard. It read, "Back off. You don't know what you're getting into." Her pulse quickened as she scanned the room, but no one seemed out of place. She crumpled the note and stuffed it into her pocket, her resolve hardening. Whoever was behind this corruption wanted them to stop. But Ellie wasn't about to let fear win. She glanced down at Rex, who sat calmly by her side, his sharp eyes scanning the room. "Looks like we're making some people nervous, boy," she said. "That means we're on the right track." By the end of the week, the task force had uncovered enough evidence to implicate several high-ranking officers. Falsified reports, bribes, and connections to organized crime were all laid bare, but the name AM still eluded them. As Ellie reviewed the files late one night, she received a text message from an unknown number. "Stop digging, or Rex won't make it out alive." Her hands shook as she read the words. The threat wasn't just directed at her. It was aimed at Rex, the loyal canine who had already uncovered so much. Ellie's protective instincts kicked in, and she immediately checked Rex's kennel to make sure he was safe. "Don't worry, boy," she whispered, kneeling beside him. "I won't let anything happen to you." But she knew the stakes had just been raised. The network of corruption was vast and dangerous, and the closer they got to the truth, the more perilous their mission became. Ellie Harper was hunched over a desk covered in files, her brow furrowed as she scanned through documents. "Look at this," she said, sliding a file toward Owen. "These bank transactions link directly to Ryan Hale, but there are payments here that connect to someone else, initials AM." Owen took the file and examined it closely. The initials appeared repeatedly in connection with large sums of money funneled through dummy corporations. "AM," he muttered. "Whoever this is, they're pulling the strings behind all of this." The realization was chilling. It wasn't just about Hale. It was about an entire network of corruption that reached beyond the police department. While Ellie and Owen combed through the files, Rex began pacing the room, sniffing at corners and cabinets. His sharp nose picked up on something unusual near a stack of older case files. He pawed at the cabinet until Owen noticed. "What is it, boy?" Owen asked, kneeling beside Rex. Rex's tail wagged briefly before he began pawing again. Ellie walked over and opened the cabinet. Inside was an old case file marked as closed, but something about it seemed off. The details of the case, a drug bust that had supposedly dismantled a major operation, didn't align with the evidence presented. "This was staged," Ellie said, her voice low. "The arrest reports were fabricated to make it look like they caught everyone involved, but the real players were protected." Owen clenched his fists, anger surging through him. And Hale was in on it the whole time. As they continued their work, Owen's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It read, "You're digging too deep. Stop, or you'll regret it." Ellie leaned over his shoulder to read the message. "They're watching us," she said, her voice laced with concern. "This isn't just about protecting Hale anymore. They're trying to shut us down." Owen looked at Rex, who sat alert and ready. "Let them come," he said, his voice steady. "We're not backing down." The team decided to move their files to a more secure location. They worked late into the night, carefully organizing evidence while keeping a watchful eye on their surroundings. Rex remained on high alert, his ears flicking at every sound. Just as they were packing up, Rex's growl broke the silence. His body tensed, and he stared at the door. "Someone's here," Owen whispered, grabbing his weapon. Ellie nodded, her hand instinctively moving to her holstered firearm. The room fell silent except for the soft padding of footsteps outside. Whoever was out there wasn't just observing, they were preparing to act. The door burst open with a deafening crash and armed intruders stormed the room. Chaos erupted as Owen and Ellie ducked for cover, drawing their weapons. Rex sprang into action, his sharp barks echoing through the small space as he stood between the attackers and his team. Owen fired a warning shot, forcing the intruders to pause momentarily. "Stay back!" he shouted, his voice commanding. Rex growled low, his body coiled like a spring, ready to launch at the first sign of aggression. Ellie crouched behind a desk, clutching the stack of files they had gathered. "We can't let them get this evidence," she said, her voice urgent. "I won't," Owen replied. "Rex and I will hold them off. You get out of here." As one of the intruders advanced, Rex leapt forward, his powerful jaws clamping onto the man's arm. The attacker screamed, dropping his weapon as Rex forced him to the ground. Owen seized the opportunity, disarming another intruder with a precise shot to their weapon hand. "Go, Ellie!" Owen shouted, covering her as she slipped out a side door with the files. Rex released his grip and returned to Owen's side, his sharp eyes scanning the room for further threats. The two worked in tandem, their bond unbreakable as they faced down the remaining attackers. Outside, Ellie sprinted toward the vehicle they had parked nearby, the files clutched tightly against her chest. She glanced back to see Owen and Rex emerge from the building, their figures silhouetted against the flashing lights of approaching police vehicles. They climbed into the car, breathless but alive. "We've got what we need," Ellie said, her voice firm. "Now we just have to make sure it doesn't fall into the wrong hands." Owen nodded, his hand resting on Rex's head. "We will," he said, his resolve unshaken. "This isn't over yet." Once safely at a new location, the team reviewed the files they had risked their lives to protect. Among them was a list of names and payments tied directly to A.M. Arnold Mayfield, a powerful local politician who had used his influence to manipulate the police department for years. "This is it," Ellie said, her voice filled with determination. "This is what we need to bring the whole operation down." Determined not to be intimidated, the team pressed on. Among the documents Rex had unearthed, Ellie found a crucial lead. A long-forgotten warehouse lease tied to a shell company owned by Mayfield. The lease dated back to the same time as the falsified drug bust. "This warehouse could be where they're keeping the real evidence," Ellie said, her voice tinged with excitement. "If we can get inside, we might find everything we need to bring Mayfield down." Owen hesitated. "It's risky," he said. "If they're using it as a base of operations, it'll be heavily guarded." Ellie met his gaze. "We don't have a choice. If we don't move now, they'll cover their tracks, and we'll lose everything." Owen looked down at Rex, who was staring up at him with unwavering loyalty. "All right," he said finally. "We go tonight." As night fell, the team prepared for their mission. Ellie double-checked their gear, ensuring they had everything they needed to document whatever they found. Owen strapped on a tactical vest, his movements practiced and efficient. Rex sat calmly beside him, his sharp eyes scanning their surroundings. "You ready for this, buddy?" Owen asked, crouching down to meet Rex's gaze. The dog wagged his tail once, his stance steady and confident. Owen smiled faintly. "Let's do this." Ellie handed Owen a flashlight and a camera. "We need to capture everything," she said. "The files alone aren't enough. We need undeniable proof." Owen nodded. "Let's move." The warehouse loomed in the distance, its silhouette stark against the night sky. The area was eerily quiet, the only sounds the rustling of leaves and the occasional distant hum of traffic. The team approached cautiously, sticking to the shadows. Rex led the way, his nose to the ground. As they reached the main entrance, he froze, his ears perking. He let out a low growl, signaling danger. "What is it, boy?" Owen whispered. Rex moved to a side door, sniffing intently. Ellie examined the lock. "It's been tampered with recently," she said. "Someone's been here." Owen pulled out a set of lockpicks and got to work. Within seconds, the door clicked open. The team slipped inside, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. Inside, the warehouse was packed with crates and filing cabinets. Ellie began photographing everything, while Owen and Rex searched for anything that could tie Mayfield and Hale to the corruption. It didn't take long. In one of the filing cabinets, Owen found a folder labeled Special Operations. Inside were detailed plans for the falsified drug bust, complete with signatures, payment records, and even photographs of Hale and Mayfield meeting with known criminals. "This is it," Owen said, holding up the folder. "This is what we need." Ellie's voice was tight. "Then let's get out of here before they find us." But as they turned to leave, Rex stopped, his growls deepening. The sound of footsteps echoed through the warehouse. "They're here," Owen said, his heart pounding. The warehouse was no longer a haven of discovery. It had turned into a battleground. Owen, Ellie, and Rex stood in the shadows, their breaths steady but hearts racing as the sound of footsteps echoed closer. Whoever had followed them wasn't here to talk. Rex crouched low, his ears twitching, his sharp eyes locked on the source of the noise. Owen placed a calming hand on his loyal partner's back, silently signaling for him to wait. Ellie held her flashlight in one hand and her camera in the other, her finger hovering over the power button in case she needed to plunge the room into darkness. The footsteps stopped abruptly. A voice broke through the silence, cold and commanding. "We know you're in here. Come out now, and this doesn't have to get messy." Owen exchanged a glance with Ellie, his jaw tightening. "They're stalling," he whispered. "They don't want us leaving with what we found." Ellie nodded, her grip tightening on her flashlight. "What's the plan?" Owen's eyes flicked to Rex, who was poised like a coiled spring. "We stick to the shadows, find a way out, and take the evidence with us. If they engage, we fight." Rex took the lead, his nose working furiously as he guided Owen and Ellie through the maze of crates and filing cabinets. The warehouse, dimly lit by a few flickering overhead lights, offered plenty of hiding spots, but also felt like a trap waiting to spring. The intruders moved cautiously, their flashlights sweeping the room. Owen counted at least 4 of them, all armed. His hand hovered over his holstered weapon, ready to draw if necessary. Rex suddenly froze, his body stiffening. Owen followed his gaze and spotted a side exit partially hidden behind a stack of crates. "Good boy," he whispered, giving Rex a quick pat. As they moved toward the exit, one of the intruders shouted, "Check the south side, they're heading that way." Their cover was blown. "Run!" Owen ordered, and the team sprinted toward the exit. The sound of heavy boots thundered behind them, followed by the sharp crack of gunfire. Bullets ricocheted off metal crates, the noise deafening in the enclosed space. Rex stayed close to Owen's side, his movements quick and agile. Ellie clutched the evidence bag tightly, her determination outweighing her fear. As they reached the door, an intruder stepped into their path, his weapon raised. Before Owen could react, Rex lunged with a ferocious bark, his powerful jaws clamping onto the man's arm. The intruder screamed, dropping his weapon as Rex brought him to the ground. "Go, Rex!" Owen commanded, and the dog released the man, retreating back to his handler. Owen kicked the door open and the team burst into the cool night air. They ran toward the tree line, their breaths visible in the cold. The intruders gave chase, their shouts echoing in the darkness. Ellie stumbled, but Owen caught her arm, steadying her. "Keep moving," he urged. Rex darted ahead, leading them to a hidden path that wound through the dense forest. The thick trees provided cover, but the danger wasn't over yet. The sound of their pursuers crashing through the underbrush was a constant reminder of how close they were. Suddenly Rex stopped, his ears perking as he stared into the darkness. Owen recognized the look immediately. Rex had a plan. "What is it, boy?" he asked, crouching beside the dog. Rex barked once, then ran a short distance ahead, his body language urging Owen and Ellie to follow. They came upon a rocky outcrop overlooking a shallow ravine. Rex positioned himself at the edge, his sharp gaze scanning their surroundings. Ellie frowned. "What's he doing?" Owen realized it at once. "He's creating a diversion," he said. "He wants us to keep going while he holds them off." "No way," Ellie said firmly. "We're not leaving him." Rex barked again, louder this time, drawing the attention of the approaching intruders. Owen clenched his fists, torn between his instincts to protect his partner and his trust in Rex's abilities. "We'll flank them," Owen decided. "Rex holds them here, and we'll circle back to take them by surprise." As the intruders closed in, Rex stood his ground, barking ferociously. His display of aggression made the men hesitate, giving Owen and Ellie the time they needed to loop around. From their new vantage point, Owen and Ellie launched their counterattack. Owen fired a warning shot, his voice booming. "Drop your weapons! You're surrounded!" The intruders panicked, their coordination faltering. Rex seized the opportunity, lunging at one of the men and disarming him with a powerful bite. Ellie took advantage of the chaos, using her flashlight to blind another attacker. Within moments, the intruders were subdued. Owen and Ellie quickly secured their weapons, tying them up with rope they found in the warehouse. As the dust settled, Owen crouched beside Rex, running his hands over the dog to check for injuries. "You okay, buddy?" he asked softly. Rex wagged his tail, licking Owen's hand in response. Despite the danger, he was unharmed and as steadfast as ever. Ellie approached, holding up the evidence bag. "We've still got everything," she said, her voice filled with relief. Owen nodded, his gaze hardening. "Then it's time to finish this." The chapter ends with Owen, Ellie, and Rex standing victorious but aware that their mission is far from over. They've won a crucial battle, but the war for justice is still unfolding. With the evidence intact and their enemies on the defensive, the team prepares for the final move to expose the corruption and bring the conspirators to justice. The sun was beginning to rise, casting long shadows over the safe house as Owen, Ellie, and Rex sat around the worn wooden table. The air was heavy with anticipation. They had spent the night organizing their evidence, preparing for what could be the most pivotal moment of their fight for justice. Owen stared at the stack of files, photos, and recordings in front of them. "We've got everything we need," he said, his voice firm. "Now we need someone who can amplify this. Someone they can't silence." Ellie nodded. "I know just the person," she said, pulling out her phone. "Ryan Marks. He's an investigative journalist I've worked with before. He's relentless when it comes to exposing corruption." Within minutes, Ellie had Marks on the line. She quickly explained their situation, detailing the evidence they had and the danger they were facing. Marks didn't hesitate. "Send me what you have. I'll meet you at a secure location to go over everything. If what you're saying checks out, we'll blow this wide open." Later that day, Owen, Ellie, and Rex met Marks at an undisclosed location, a quiet diner on the outskirts of town. The journalist, a man in his 40s with a weathered face and sharp eyes, greeted them with a nod. "You must be Owen," Marks said, extending a hand. "I've heard about your case. Let's see what you've got." Ellie handed over the evidence. As Marks reviewed the files, his expression shifted from curiosity to disbelief. The photos, the financial records, the recordings, it all painted a damning picture of corruption. The final piece was the connection to Arnold Mayfield, a powerful local politician with deep ties to organized crime. "This is explosive," Marks said, leaning back in his chair. "Mayfield's been untouchable for years. If we release this, it's not just your department that's going to feel the heat, it's going to shake the entire region." Owen clenched his fists. "Good. It's about time." Marks wasted no time. Within hours, he and his team began crafting a bombshell exposé, backed by the undeniable evidence Owen and Ellie had provided. They worked through the night, ensuring every detail was airtight. The next morning, the story broke. Newspapers, television channels, and online platforms exploded with headlines about the corruption scandal. The article laid everything bare. Captain Ryan Hale's betrayal, the falsified evidence, the connection to Mayfield, and the department-wide conspiracy to cover up crimes. Rex's role wasn't forgotten. A photo of the loyal German Shepherd standing beside Owen accompanied the article, with the caption, "The dog who uncovered the truth." The fallout was immediate. Mayfield's name became synonymous with corruption. He was arrested within hours of the exposé, his political career in ruins. Captain Hale and other implicated officers were taken into custody, their once pristine reputations destroyed. The department announced a full internal investigation, promising sweeping reforms to rebuild trust. As Owen watched the news coverage from the safe house, he felt a mix of emotions: relief, vindication, and lingering anger at how deeply the betrayal had cut. But most of all, he felt gratitude for Rex, Ellie, and the small team that had refused to give up on the truth. A week later, Owen stood in the courthouse once again, but this time the atmosphere was completely different. The judge addressed the court with a stern but relieved tone. Given the overwhelming evidence of corruption within the department and the clear fabrication of evidence in this case, all charges against Owen Jacobs are hereby dismissed. A cheer erupted from the small group of supporters in the courtroom. Owen turned to Ellie and gave her a grateful smile. Then, he knelt down beside Rex, who wagged his tail excitedly. "We did it, buddy," Owen whispered, scratching behind Rex's ears. "We're finally free." A few days after his exoneration, Owen had been approached by the police department with an offer to reinstate him. They framed it as a symbolic gesture, a way to show the community that the department was serious about reform. Owen had spent countless hours debating the decision, weighing his loyalty to the badge against the pain of the betrayal he had suffered. Ellie had been the one to help him find clarity. "You don't have to make a decision right now," she had said, sitting with him over coffee one evening. "You've already done more for this department than most people could in a lifetime. Maybe it's time to focus on yourself for a while." Her words had stayed with him, and ultimately, Owen decided to take a break from law enforcement. It wasn't a permanent goodbye, but he knew he needed time to heal, to rediscover himself outside of the uniform. Though Owen had stepped away from the force, he wasn't content to sit idle. He began volunteering at a local training center for K-9 officers, using his experience to mentor young handlers and their K-9 partners. Watching the eager faces of the recruits and the boundless energy of their dogs brought a sense of fulfillment Owen hadn't realized he needed. One afternoon, he stood in the training field, watching a young officer work with a spirited Belgian Malinois. The dog, named Scout, had energy to spare but lacked focus. "You're trying to control him too much," Owen called out, walking over. "Trust him a little. Give him space to show you what he can do." The officer nodded, adjusting his approach. Within minutes, Scout completed the obstacle course with impressive precision. The young handler turned to Owen, his face lit with gratitude. "Thanks, sir. That really helped." Owen smiled. "It's not about controlling them. It's about building a bond. Once they trust you, they'll give you everything they've got." Ellie Harper, too, had found a renewed sense of purpose. After the corruption scandal, she was promoted to head a special reform task force within the department. Her role was to ensure that the lessons of the past weren't forgotten and that the department's culture was rebuilt from the ground up. She visited Owen often, seeking his advice on various initiatives. "You're practically the co-leader of this task force," she joked one evening as they reviewed policies on her laptop. "I should put your name on the memo." Owen chuckled, shaking his head. "I'm just glad you're the one leading the charge. If anyone can fix that mess, it's you." Their friendship had deepened over the course of their ordeal, built on mutual respect and shared determination. Ellie often joked that Rex was her favorite member of the team, but it was clear that Owen's presence in her life meant just as much. Rex, now retired from active duty, had adjusted seamlessly to life as Owen's constant companion. Though he no longer wore his badge, his protective instincts remained as sharp as ever. Whether they were hiking through the woods or relaxing at home, Rex was always at Owen's side. One weekend, Owen took Rex to a nearby lake for a day of relaxation. As Rex splashed in the water, chasing sticks and barking joyfully, Owen couldn't help but marvel at the dog's resilience. Despite everything they had been through, Rex remained unshaken, his loyalty and spirit undimmed. "You're a hero, you know that?" Owen said as Rex bounded back to shore, shaking water all over him. The dog wagged his tail, his eyes gleaming with happiness. In that moment, Owen felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude, not just for Rex but for the bond they shared, a bond that had carried them through the darkest of times. One afternoon, Owen returned to the precinct, not as an officer but as a visitor. He had promised to meet with some of his former colleagues, many of whom had reached out to express their support after the truth came to light. Walking through the familiar hallways brought a flood of memories, both good and bad. As he approached the K-9 unit, he saw a group of officers gathered around Rex's old kennel, now empty. One of the younger officers, a woman named Mia, looked up and smiled. "He's a legend around here," she said, gesturing to a plaque on the wall. It read, "Rex, for outstanding service and unwavering loyalty." Owen felt a lump in his throat as he read the words. "He's not just a legend," he said quietly. "He's family." That evening, Owen sat on his porch once more, watching the sun set over the horizon. Ellie had joined him for dinner, and the two of them reminisced about their journey while Rex dozed at their feet. "You ever think about what's next?" Ellie asked, sipping her tea. Owen nodded. "Every day. I think about how we got here, how close we came to losing everything. But more than that, I think about how lucky we are to have made it through." Ellie smiled. "You've got a lot of life left, Owen. And with Rex by your side, I have no doubt you'll make the most of it." As the sky turned shades of orange and pink, Owen felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time, he felt ready to face it. He had his freedom, his integrity, and the unshakable bond of a dog who had proven time and again that loyalty and courage could overcome even the greatest of challenges. Owen reached down to pat Rex on the head, his voice soft but full of conviction. "Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." This isn't just a story about corruption or crime. It's a story about loyalty, courage, and the unbreakable bond between a man and his dog. It's proof that no matter how dark the path may seem, with perseverance, truth, and trust, light can always break through. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs a reminder of the power of resilience. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button to join us for more stories of bravery, inspiration, and the human spirit. Together we can celebrate the heroes, both two- and four-legged, who remind us what it means to never give up.